Hidden beneath the weight of time lies a scary narrative. The heartbreaking ways that women were exploited during slavery. Their pain, their suffering often overshadowed in the annals of history. Yet, one urgent question must be posed. How many silenced cries and shattered dreams remain buried in obscurity? Stand unwavering with us as we unearth these agonizing tales that humanity must never forget. Sexual violence. Slaveholders frequently sexually abused women while they were in bonds, and raping an enslaved woman was never a felony in a slaveholding state. Men would sometimes physically assault women, but other times they would coerce them into having sex, such as by promising them monetary benefits or threatening to sell them if they refused. For each woman who experienced it, the gamut of experiences that made up the sexual exploitation of enslaved women overlapped or altered. These experiences could range from formalized concubinage to severe penetrative rape. Enslaved women's reactions to sexual harassment by men varied just as much as the abuse itself. When women rejected the sexual approaches of slaveholders, they could be subjected to physical punishment, which was occasionally exceedingly harsh. When questioned by the WPA, Minnie Folkes referred to this violence. She said that when her mother refused to be a wife to this man, an overseer tied her up and beat her. Folkes explains how her mother's rejection of the overseer's approaches led to this punishment in a fairly cryptic manner as a result. "Honey, I don't like to discuss those times because my mother did go through hardship. You are aware that there once was an overseer who used to tie up mother in the barn when she was standing on a block by wrapping a rope around her arms and her head. As soon as they had her tied, the block was relocated, leaving her feet dangling so that she couldn't use the escape hatch. Now the old man would begin beating her until her back and heels were covered in blood. With these two eyeballs, I took some of the whelps and scars for myself. Was a leather object that was roughly the width of my hand from little finger to thumb, and it resembled the whips that people used to whip horses. What did she do to get them to beat her up and do that? I asked my mom. She uttered nothing. Other than that, she declined to marry that man. Many women were unable to flee sexual assault by their captors, especially without being beaten as a result. Because they worked next to white men, women who worked in plantation households were particularly vulnerable to sexual predators. Harriet Jacobs, a young girl who had been sexually assaulted, spoke of her contempt for her captor and her attempts to seek comfort from her mistress, Mary Norcom, who was fictionalized as Mrs. Flint. Instead, her envious mistress reacted angrily and hostilely. Norcom's attitude was typical of white women who believed that Jezebels, the created hypersexualized character that whites attributed to enslaved women, were the genuine victims of sexual assault. If you find this disturbing, keep watching to see how the women were subjected to treatment and the harrowing conditions they endure. And hit the subscribe button for more informative videos. Human zoo. Human zoos are something that is firmly ingrained in our culture. Slavery of African people, ethnic cleansing of Native Americans, and colonialist imperialism are the roots that combine to form racism, which still has repercussions in our modern world. The long history of human zoos that featured Africans and conquered indigenous peoples and put them on display in much the same way as animals is one example of the sad history of racism and colonizers viewing themselves as superior to others. These zoos were created by colonizers who saw themselves as superior to others. People would be abducted and transported to different locations to be shown as part of human zoos. It was not unusual for these individuals to pass quite suddenly, sometimes even within a year of being held captive. This history is extensive and in-depth, extending into the 1950s. There are several articles and a large number of images below, which will allow us to see the reality of this dreadful inheritance. During the height of the imperialist era in Europe, more than 35,000 men, women, and children left their homes to take part in exotic spectacles that were conducted in major cities such as Paris, London, and Berlin. These events were attended by people from all over the world. Entire families were brought in from the colonies, recreated in a setting that was meant to resemble their hometown and dressed up in garb that was meant to represent their culture. They were then paid to perform for an audience. The expositions, which were an opportunity for the West to demonstrate its authority over its colonies, eventually became a regular element of international trade fairs and developed a thirst for exoticism and travel to far-flung locations. Tragic examples, such as Sarah's Story, a colonial showpiece. During the modern era, when explorers such as Columbus and Vespucci enticed indigenous back to Europe from their homelands, the practice of placing the primitive on display arose. This practice is considered to be primitive. Native people were displayed and paraded around like trophies to provide evidence that exotic regions had been discovered. However, what started as wonder and curiosity eventually turned into an age of racial supremacy and the creation of the barbarian. Sarah Sayarjivi Artman, a South African girl of 20 years old who was known by her nickname Sarji, would become emblematic of the dark era that led to the increase in popularity of human zoos. She went to London in 1810 to take part in an exhibition after being approached about doing so by a dealer in exotic animals while she was working in Cape Town. The young woman went voluntarily with the story that she would find fame and fortune there. Exhibitors were searching for specific attributes in their eye-following recruits that either coincided with the European beauty standard or offered surprising novelties. These qualities might also offer both. Sarah was born with a condition called stidophagia, which manifests itself as protuberant buttocks and enlarged labia. She found herself being displayed in cages at sideshow attractions while wearing clothes that were too tight for her body, which violated any cultural norms of decency that were prevalent at the time. A few years later, she traveled to Paris, the center of racial anthropology, where researchers probed and prodded subjects to formulate their hypotheses. Sarah eventually became dependent on alcohol and turned to prostitution as a means of supporting herself. It had only been 4 years since she had moved to Europe. After Sarah's death from extreme poverty, her skeleton, sexual organs, and brain were placed on display at the Museum of Mankind in Paris, where they stayed until 1974. Sarah had lived her entire life in abject poverty. In 2002, President Nelson Mandela made a formal request for the remains of his wife to be returned to South Africa. Sarah Baartman finally returned to her homeland, nearly 200 years after she had stood on deck and seen her world vanish behind her. There, the air smelled of bushu and mint, and the veld cried out her name. The objectification of light-skinned enslaved women. During the dark era of slavery, where the brutal exploitation of human beings was commonplace, light-skinned enslaved women found themselves particularly vulnerable to a unique and disturbing form of objectification. Their fair complexion made them stand out amidst the horrific backdrop of racial oppression, leading to their increased susceptibility to sexual exploitation. One disturbing aspect of this exploitation was the sale of light-skinned enslaved women as concubines and prostitutes. Enslavers recognized that these women, with their lighter skin, were often considered more desirable by white men. Consequently, they were viewed as valuable assets, not for their humanity, but for their perceived attractiveness. This cruel practice further dehumanized these women, reducing them to commodities for the gratification of their enslavers. Additionally, the objectification extended beyond the confines of the plantation. White women, too, engaged in sexual relations with enslaved men with a notable preference for light-skinned individuals. This underscores the complex web of relationships that existed during this period, revealing a troubling intersection of racism, power dynamics, and sexual exploitation. As we bring this exploration to a close, let us not just be spectators of history, but active advocates for a future free from such heinous prejudices. For acknowledging and understanding these dark chapters, we commit to ensuring they never recur. Together, let's remember, learn, and act. Reenactments of primitive life in the colonies were a source of entertainment for Europeans who enjoyed looking at scantily clad African women and gawking at them. Anthropologists and other researchers have the opportunity to watch entire villages full of tribespeople and collect empirical information to support their hypotheses regarding which races are superior.